Now, if Ossoff and Warnock win, the Senate will be split 50-50, with Madam Vice President-elect Kamala Harris having the final vote. The incoming administration possibly needs this win in order to pass legislation, because if Republican incumbents win, Republicans will hold a slim majority of 52-48. Now, joining us now is Senate candidate Jon Ossoff. Thank you, sir, for joining us.
Tashani, good evening. Thank you for having me.
All right, well, let's jump right in. Now, politics aside, Americans are struggling, and as you can see, Washington can't even agree on a second stimulus bill during a pandemic. What makes you any different if elected?
Well, Tashani, respectfully, if I might, to be very clear, the U.S. House of Representatives passed a very ambitious recovery package in midsummer. And it's the Senate under Mitch McConnell's leadership that has refused to consider that legislation and which has not passed any kind of companion bill that provides any kind of significant economic relief for the people. And this is why these two Senate races in Georgia are so important, is that unless we win these two races in Georgia, McConnell will continue to control the Senate. And he will try to do to Joe and Kamala just like he tried to do to President Obama. They will block the COVID relief that we need. They will block civil rights and voting rights legislation. They will block legislation to make health care affordable for every American. So if you're in Georgia, please make a note that early voting begins on Monday. These are going to be very close races, and we got to get out there and vote so we can get things done for the people.
Now, Black Americans, as we all know, have been especially hard hit by this pandemic. Nearly 200,000 Georgians have filed for unemployment claims. Many of them, as you probably know, are Black. So what's your plan to fix that?
Well, there's no doubt that Georgia's Black community and Black Americans across the country have been hit so hard by this pandemic. And here in Georgia, there's a few reasons. First of all, there is structural racism in our healthcare system and our state's refusal to expand Medicaid. Its neglect of our hospital infrastructure. We've lost 9 hospitals in the last 10 years, have all contributed to this burden of chronic illness, asthma, diabetes, and high blood pressure, which is concentrated in particular in the Black community. Food deserts in many majority Black neighborhoods mean that there are significant issues with nutrition. Lack of investment in basic nutrition programs and school nutrition programs mean a lot of folks lack access to the food that they need. And right now there are a lot of families that are food insecure because we're in the midst of a dire economic crisis. So what we need to do is empower the health and medical experts to beat the virus. We need to pass direct economic relief. That means another round of stimulus checks. That means more support for small businesses to provide short-term economic relief. And then we need to invest in a jobs program. And we need to make sure that every community, and that includes Georgia's Black community, participates equitably in this jobs and recovery program, which can mean infrastructure investment, construction of new hospitals, upgrading our public schools, building new transit and transportation infrastructure so that people can get back and forth between home and work easier, and building new health clinics to serve underserved parts of our state and underserved communities.
And no disrespect, Ossoff, but I feel like we hear this plea whenever votes are needed from us. How do we hold you accountable?
Well, let me answer that in a couple of ways, and it's exactly the question that you should be asking me. Because, talk is cheap, and what people need is results. So first of all, I will come right back here on this program to answer questions, to be held accountable for every vote, to speak honestly about my views on the issues, to debate them, to approach them with an open heart and an open mind and a willingness to change my mind. My opponent, David Perdue, won't even debate me in public. He hadn't held a public town hall meeting in 6 years. I will be the most accessible and transparent senator in Georgia's history. But I also want people to know a little bit about where I'm coming from and where my heart is. My first ever exposure to public service was working for Congressman John Lewis. He instilled in me a conviction to fight for justice and a belief in the power of the people when we vote to secure justice. So the other thing that I want to make really clear to folks in terms of the stakes of these elections is that next year and 2022, these can be the most productive for civil rights and voting rights legislation since 1964 and 1965 if we win these two Senate races. And then we will look back on the events of last summer, the peaceful mobilization after the murders of Breonna Taylor and George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery, as our generation's equivalent of the march that that John Lewis and Hosea Williams and Amelia Boynton led across the Edmund Pettus Bridge on Bloody Sunday in 1965, which paved the way for passage of the Voting Rights Act of 1965. But we will only be able to pass a new Civil Rights Act to secure true equal justice for all, to end racial profiling and police brutality, and a new Voting Rights Act to end voter suppression if we can pass legislation in the Senate. And that's why with early voting beginning on Monday, these Senate races in Georgia are so important.
Well, it was a pleasure having you. I thank you for your honesty and transparency, and we will definitely hold you to that. Thank you again.
As you should. Thank you. Good night.
Good night.